I used to think having parents was a blessing, but then I realized not everyone who becomes a parent should have children, especially when they try to mold you into their idea of a perfect version with scalpels bleach and words that kill your self-worth. Welcome to True Reddit Reads, where stories that sound fictional turn out to be disturbingly real. Today is my story, A Child Who Was Adopted Only to Be Forced into Becoming a Living Art Piece for Her Adoptive Parents' Twisted Obsession. But don't cry for me just yet, because I'll make sure you leave this story satisfied when the brainwashed girl becomes a warrior and true beauty is no longer defined by the color of her skin. Chapter 1. I Am Not Your Doll. I didn't know my real name until I was 17, because throughout my childhood I wasn't allowed to use the name on my birth certificate. My adoptive parents. Yes, I call them that. Though I've never truly considered them, my parents changed my name to Clara. It sounded elegant, pale, and very upper-class American. I'm Asian, honey brown skin, monolid eyes, coal black hair. Those things were my flaws according to them. They said, "We paid to adopt you. You're a project, and we're going to fix you." I remember the first day they brought me home. They didn't hug me. They didn't say welcome home. They just looked me up and down like they were inspecting an outdated, mismatched piece of furniture. 3 months later, I was taken to a skin whitening spa. And no, not the relaxing facial type you're thinking of. It was harsh, bleaching cream, chemical acids that burned and peeled my skin in patches. I cried. They laughed. My adoptive mother took a picture and said, "This is step one to turning you into an angel." I wasn't allowed to use mirrors. My room was plastered with photos of white actresses, big eyes, blonde hair, sharp jawlines. Every day my mother made me choose the most beautiful one. Then she said, "Good. We'll shape you to match her." When I was 12, they took me to a doctor, no name tag, no license. A Russian man. He injected something into my face that left my jaw paralyzed for a whole week. They told me to stay quiet. I sipped porridge through a straw eyes, welling with pain. My adoptive mother documented everything in a journal, like she was writing a beauty blog, day one Clara post-cheek filler. Promising results. I used to believe I was truly ugly. I thought if I became paler, thinner, more like the daughter they wanted, maybe they'd love me. But no. Every time I tried, they set a new bar. I once tried to rebel. At 13, I ran away. Walked nearly 10 kilometers to a classmate's house. No phone, no money, just a tracksuit and the naive hope someone would save me. My adoptive father picked me up within 2 hours. He said nothing on the ride home. But once there, he blasted opera music and beat me. Not slapped, he used a belt. Each lash came with a word, you. Shamed. Me, I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, I'll grow up. I'll get out. At 15, my mother forced me on a rapid weight loss regime. She gave me a bottle, said it was detox. It was actually high-dose diuretics. I collapsed at school from dehydration. They denied everything. Claimed I faked it for attention. The school did nothing. They were too wealthy, too reputable. I was just a weird Asian girl in their perfect family. But everything began to change when I turned 16. After an emergency hospital visit from a drug reaction, I was transferred to a different facility where I met a nurse named Priya. She was the first person to look at me and ask, "Do you want to stay here a bit longer? Just to rest." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I broke down in the ER. Chapter 2, The Failed Escape, and the Nightmare That Began. Nurse Priya didn't ask me things like, "Do you feel sad, or do your parents treat you well?" She looked at the old injection marks on my arm and asked in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, "Anyone ever given you this at home?" I nodded. She sat down beside the bed, stayed silent for a few seconds, then gently said, "You don't have to go back there. Not if you don't want to." It was the first time I dared to say 2 words. Set me free. I didn't know whether I was brave or just reckless, but within 24 hours I agreed to sign a form to refuse early discharge under the reason of neurological monitoring just to stay. I knew my adoptive parents would go ballistic, and just as I feared, less than 5 hours later they showed up at the hospital, demanded to see me, demanded to take me home immediately. I heard them shouting from inside the medical wing, "A child who doesn't obey is a defective product." Priya stood firmly in front of my room. She wasn't big, but in that moment she looked like a warrior to me. Holding a clipboard unblinking, she said, "She's currently under special observation. Under state law, I have the right to hold her if there's reason to suspect danger from the family." My mother screamed, "Who the hell do you think you are meddling in someone else's family?" Priya replied with a sentence, "I'll remember for the rest of my life. I'm the first person who gives a damn whether she lives." But they didn't give up. They came back this time with a lawyer. My family wasn't just rich, they were disgustingly wealthy. The kind who could make a single phone call and have doctors, schools, and police all bow in unison. I was summoned to sign a voluntary discharge from the treatment center form. My mother stood right there holding a photo, a picture of me at 14 smiling a twisted smile after a long bleaching treatment. "You'll never find another family who loves you like I do," she said. "If you walk away, I'll make sure the whole world knows you're a lunatic. Trash, unwanted." I didn't sign. They vanished for 3 days. I thought I was safe until a janitor quietly slipped a small note into my hand. "Be careful. Someone paid to get the girl out of here." They said their family. I froze. I knew something awful was coming. That night I texted Priya, "I want to run. Really. Help me." And so the plan began. Priya knew someone, a family who had taken in abused kids before. They were willing to host me temporarily. Everything had to be extremely discreet. No going through the official foster system because my parents would find me. We arranged a hospital transfer at night. I wore a hoodie, a mask, and sat in an ambulance pretending to be a regular transfer case. Everything went smoothly until we turned out of the hospital complex. A black SUV pulled up, blocked the road, and the car door opened. It was my father. He didn't say a word, just slammed his hand against the window. "Get out. Now." The driver reversed. Priya screamed, "Drive, drive." The SUV tailed us. I heard the engine roar like something out of an action movie. I never imagined one day I'd be fleeing from my family like I was escaping from kidnappers. Eventually, we shook them by diving into an underground parking garage of a public building. I was rushed into a service elevator riding between levels. That night, I slept in the tiny guest room of Priya's family, on an old bunk bed under a slightly frayed wool blanket. And for the first time in 16 years, I slept without dreaming of needles screaming or the smell of bleach. Just the hum of a fan and peace. Chapter 3: Exposing the Truth and the Public War. I had escaped, but I wasn't free. I still bore their last name, still legally bound to them on paper, and all they had to do was convince the court I was mentally unstable or brainwashed, and they'd drag me back into that hell all over again. I used to think silence was the way to survive, but the truth is, silence made me disappear even from myself. 1 week after the escape, I went with Priya and her family to meet a human rights attorney. He was a black man who'd previously worked on child abuse cases across the state. After hearing everything he said, "Kid, you're no longer just a victim. You're now a witness. And the first thing we do is let justice see your wounds." We began gathering documents, evidence. Over 50 scars on my body were photographed. Toxicology reports showing illegal skin bleaching agents. Hospital records indicating prolonged signs of abuse, and especially one audio recording. A phone call where my mother said she'll never be white, but she can look like it. That's the only thing she should be grateful for. The case was filed in court, and the wrath of my parents ignited. They hired 3 attorneys, filed a 12-page counterclaim labeling me as delusional, a confused girl with identity disorder, manipulated by a nurse with political motives. They even fed a sensationalist story to a tabloid. We only ever wanted the best for her. We love her. But now she's being used as a weapon against her own parents. I almost broke. Sometimes I asked myself, what am I doing? I could have stayed quiet, lived in hiding, started over. But then I thought of other kids. Kids dragged into clinics for skin bleaching, injected with hormones, brainwashed by parents repeating beauty is pain. Only the pale get love. No one will ever love you if they see your real skin. The first hearing was the moment I faced them again after more than 2 months. I wore a plain white shirt, hair tied up, no makeup, no whitening cream, no scar concealer. My parents looked at me like I was a monster. But for the first time, I truly saw them not as parents, but as two people obsessed with power and appearances using the word love as a leash to control others. In court, my lawyer played the audio, then showed the scar photos, then presented the records of illegal cosmetic procedures, including the name of the unlicensed Russian doctor now under investigation. My father laughed. She agreed, he said. I answered I agreed when I was 12. When you threatened to starve me if I didn't get the shots. When she said I was an embarrassment if I showed my face before peeling my skin. The court granted me temporary placement with the host family and opened an abuse investigation. But the moment I remember most wasn't the courtroom. It came afterward. An 11-year-old boy approached me and handed me a small note. You made me feel like I don't have to be white to be loved. I didn't cry in front of everyone. But that night, I collapsed into Priya's arms and sobbed like a child who for the first time was being held out of care, not out of correction. Chapter 4: The Nighttime Flight and Freedom Bought with Tears. I thought the first court hearing was the climax of everything. I was wrong. My adoptive parents, or rather the people who used to own me, couldn't accept defeat. And they certainly couldn't accept being humiliated in public. Just 3 days after the hearing, I realized they were still watching me. And not the accidental sighting kind. I mean the kind where someone stands across the street, phone in hand, eyes locked on you without blinking as you exit a store. One evening, while walking to a therapy session with Priya, a car crept behind us for more than 3 blocks. Priya glanced back, her eyes stretched tight like strings about to snap. Get in the car. Now. We changed directions 3 times, cutting into a narrow alley behind the old hospital. When the car finally disappeared, I asked Priya, what do you think they'll do? She didn't answer right away, but I could already see it in her eyes. Whatever it takes to get you back. They don't want a daughter, they want control. My lawyer confirmed they were hiring private investigators, and a new legal team was preparing custody paperwork, claiming I had been manipulated and lured away by outside influences. I laughed, but it was one of those dry, choked laughs, half fear, half helplessness. After an emergency family meeting, Priya's family made a decision no one wanted. I had to leave. This time, really leave. They arranged for me to be taken into a safe house within a domestic violence survivor network, a place no one could trace. Not even the police had full access to its location. No social media, no phones, no old identity. On the night we said goodbye, Priya handed me a small embroidered handkerchief with floral stitching. She said, this was my mother's gift to me. She used to say, when you feel like you don't belong anywhere, hold on to something that's real, something that carries love. I hugged her tight, said nothing. Just cried. How many times had I cried by now? But this time my tears didn't taste bitter. The journey to the safe house was a sequence of endless relocations. I was moved through 3 different states, stayed at 5 different places, in 10 days, each hundreds of miles apart. A nonprofit healthcare organization secretly accepted me into a protective care program for high-risk patients. During the journey, I fell ill. My old skin condition flared up from the change in climate and lack of medicine. But at least no one was forcing me to inject whitening agents anymore. I slept in rooms with soft yellow lights. A real doctor listened to me. And for the first time, I was addressed by the name I chose, Lena. Not a whiter name, not an upgraded version, just me. But then something happened that nearly destroyed everything. One of the girls at the shelter accidentally posted an Instagram story. In the background, I was visible walking through the backyard. No tags, no names. But for my former parents, even the back of my head was enough. 2 days later, a stranger showed up at the gate. The shelter manager told me I had to be relocated again. But this time I refused. I said, I'm not running anymore. If they want to destroy me, then at least let me live as myself until the very end. The manager looked at me for a long time. Then she called the lawyer, and she herself filed for an emergency protective order, requesting the court to permanently revoke custody and issue a no-contact order. I didn't know if that day I was doing the right thing or walking straight into another battlefield. All I knew was I chose. For the first time in my life, I chose for myself. Chapter 5, When the Law Fails and the Rise of a Warrior. I used to think once I left that house, I'd be safe. Once I had a restraining order, they'd disappear. Once the court saw me, my patchy skin from chemicals, the thick stack of medical records, justice would take my side. I was naive. The next court hearing was scheduled for 3 months later. In the meantime, I lived in a secret home funded by a humanitarian organization. There I met people like me, not with the same stories, but with the same eyes, people whose childhood had been stolen, people who had lost faith in love, people who were learning to rebuild themselves from the rubble. I had weekly therapy sessions. I learned how to make leather crafts, and I was allowed to keep a cat named Nemo. He'd lost a leg after being hit by a car, but still slept peacefully on my pillow every night. I learned how to breathe, how to sleep without dreaming of needles, how to look into a mirror without seeing the biracial child that needed to be fixed for someone else's comfort. Then the day came, the day I had to face them in court once more. I sat beside my lawyer, my heart pounding like a war drum as the back doors opened and they walked in. Still them. Still that powerful gait. Still those judgmental eyes. My adoptive mother wore an all-white Chanel outfit, ironic, really. White. My father gave a faint smirk and waved at me like this was all just one big misunderstanding. Their lawyer was a real fox. He presented photos of me being well cared for my treated skin, a chain of emails showing their concern for their daughter's future. He said, Your Honor, this young lady has been emotionally agitated. She's been influenced by outsiders. Where is her biological family? No one has come forward to reclaim her. So who else can care for her better than her legal parents? I didn't know what the judge was thinking. But me, I nearly threw up. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the witness stand, hands trembling, but my voice was clearer than I expected. I told them everything. Every forced bleaching that left my skin peeling, every injection that made my vision blur, every night I cried, every time I begged, I talked about Priya, about Nemo, about the days I wanted to die, and how now I didn't. I didn't cry, not a single tear. I thought I've shed enough. But then something happened I didn't expect. The court delayed the ruling. The reason lack of clear evidence of immediate danger. More time needed to assess care conditions. More time. More chances for them to drag me back. That night, I shattered a glass in the kitchen, not from anger, but from a wordless despair. I screamed into my pillow, punched the wall until my knuckles bled, shouted, How much is enough? Do I have to die for you to finally see me as a clear danger case? The only person who pulled me back from that edge was Nathan. He was a former foster child who'd stayed with me for a few weeks in the first shelter. Nathan had also been adopted by a wealthy family and later returned like a defective product after 2 years. He called me over Zoom. His face went still when I told him about the hearing. Then he said, We weren't born to please anyone. We exist, and that is enough. The very next day I decided if the court couldn't protect me, I'd protect myself. With my lawyer, we submitted an emergency report to the media without revealing my identity, but enough to raise alarms about parents using illegal drugs to force cosmetic procedures on their adopted child. One article went viral. Bleached child, a dark side of perfectionism and covert racism in adoption. A wave of outrage followed. Human rights organizations joined in, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my voice carried weight. Chapter 6: The Journey of Rebirth. From Victim to Warrior. I used to think if I survived, that would be enough. But it turns out, existing is only the first step. Living as your true self, that's the real victory. After that first article went viral on social media, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel alone anymore. Hundreds of messages came in from strangers, people I had never met, people who had also been forced by their parents to be beautiful, who were coerced into plastic surgeries, pushed into becoming versions of themselves that they never chose to be. Some were sent to gender correction therapy just because they didn't want to wear a dress. Some were bleached, forced to get double eyelid surgery, have their hair pulled out, injected with hormones. They told me that I helped them feel sane, that they weren't weak, that they didn't deserve what happened. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a conference on humane healthcare for minors. I wasn't a keynote speaker, I just told my story. I stood in front of a hall of 300 people, trembling, my heart racing, but this time no one mocked my skin color or my face. They listened. I spoke of the mirror I once smashed because I didn't recognize the girl in it. Of Priya, the first person who looked at me without disgust. Of Nemo, the little cat, who still slept peacefully on my belly every night, as if to say, even when a part of you is gone, you can still live whole. Then something miraculous happened. The second court hearing. Thanks to public pressure and new evidence from independent organizations, including testimonies from Nurse Priya, the shelter home, and 2 child psychology experts, I was granted full autonomy. The court reopened investigations into my adoptive parents' hiring of unlicensed foreign doctors. In the end, they lost all custody rights permanently. I was officially released from all legal ties to them. That night, I cried. Not from sadness, but because I was truly free. I changed my name. New documents, new ID, a name that carried no painful memories. I moved in with Priya for a while. She became my unofficial guardian, no paperwork needed. We chose each other, willingly. By day, I studied nursing. By night, I blogged. My articles on medical abuse of minors were shared in many support groups. I started connecting with teens who'd been through the same hell I had. Then one day, Nathan showed up at the door. He was holding a stack of files. We should do something bigger, he said. Not just survive, but help others survive too. Together, we founded a secret network, a system where kids in danger could send anonymous texts, find their way to safe houses. We called it Project Hollow, because anyone who's ever been broken from the inside knows exactly what it feels like to be hollow. But from that emptiness, we began to rebuild. On the day I received my nursing license, Priya hugged me tightly. She whispered, "You're not just someone who survived. You're someone who keeps living." And I still do. I no longer look in the mirror and see a child who didn't deserve love. I see a woman who can be both fragile and fierce, someone who once drowned and swam back up alone. I don't forgive them, and I don't need to. What I do forgive is myself, for ever thinking I didn't deserve to be loved. Now I know I do. And if you're listening to this story, if you've ever been taught to hate yourself, I just want you to know you deserve love too, without having to change anything. You know something. There are scars that may never fade, but they remind me that I'm still alive. I don't forgive my adoptive parents. I don't even need their apology. What I needed was a life that's truly mine. And if you're listening to this story with teary eyes, remember this: you're not wrong for being different. The ones who tried to fix you to fit their vision, they're the ones who were wrong. I survived, and now I am living free.